Come along with me to see how this man cannot believe the holy sword is piercing his heart while everyone else celebrates. His name was the necromancer Archimond. He realized the 10-year Continental War was finally over-ended by a joint operation where the Imperial Vanguard pushed forward while an elite force slipped in from behind. Archimond had anticipated this move and built defensive lines, but in the end, he failed because of one man, the Northern Knight Commander, Barkel Rhineland. The hero declared that this massive victory was not his achievement alone. Countless people bled and suffered to reach this moment, so he demanded Archimond surrender for the peace of the continent. Archimond screamed that those people did nothing while millions died of the plague, yet now they dared to speak of peace. He called them worse than dogs and swore he would personally slaughter every single knight and human on the continent. The warriors gasped in horror, seeing that even on the brink of death, he was still casting necromancy. One soldier warned that if they did not kill him right now, the situation would become extremely dangerous. Barkel shouted that 20 million people died from the plague, yet Archimond still turned them into his undead army. He insisted that sparked the war, but Archimond sneered, saying that among those 20 million were surely the people of his own home. He basically accused him of doing everything out of pure revenge. Watch closely right here because the hero raised his sword and swore everything he did was for the future of children. Archimond fell silent, clearly sensing the deep corruption hidden in the gaze of that hero. Yet he also saw the resolve of a righteous knight, finally kneeling down to accept his tragic and inevitable end. However, Barkel sheathed the holy sword and drew a common weapon instead. He asked for any last words, and hearing that necromancers do not die easily, he severed his head in one clean strike. The soldiers celebrated the fall of Archimond with joy, and suddenly the entire scene shifted completely. Two maids smiled happily watching their cute little young master trying to move his lips to speak. Archimond was completely confused, and one of them called him Klein while showing a portrait so he would say, "Mama." The tiny baby babbled and they got incredibly excited, thinking he was trying to speak at such an early age. But to their utter surprise, the sweet child recited a necromancy spell to summon his army of the undead. The maids were absolutely terrified by what they heard, and then 15 years quickly passed. You probably did not expect this, but the boy grew up looking like a masterpiece sculpted by the gods themselves. Klein became an incredibly attractive teenager, and they wondered what he ate to look so gorgeous. He only sighed, but suddenly someone threw water over him, ordering the evil spirit to leave his body. The man claimed Klein showed the exact same gaze as Archimond, completely bewitching several maids with his beauty. The man insisted that the purification ritual had worked just in time. Klein asked if he was insane, and if he ever got tired of doing these ridiculous rituals for so many years. But the man flatly refused to listen. He explained that Archimond's soul lived inside him, meaning he required constant spiritual cleansing. Even though our main character denied it instantly, the man splashed holy water over him again without hesitation. Klein called him crazy and walked away, but the man ordered 2 guards to grab him and prepare a freezing bath as punishment. The young man never imagined his new life would be such a living hell. In his past life, he was absolutely certain he had died the moment they cut off his head. But upon waking, he was trapped in a baby's body, and to make matters worse, his very first babbles were forbidden spells. Because of that huge mistake, everyone around him began treating him like a literal demon. And when he turned 3, he ended up locked in a monastery, where he met a strict priest of the Holy Order. His name was Garrison Veerman, and he officially started the endless torment of young Klein. They prayed around him 24 hours a day, and constantly threw him into purifying garlic baths. Then came purification by fire, enduring terrible torture, under the grand excuse of saving his soul from darkness. 5 years passed, and Klein was now wearing a ridiculous little party hat. Join me in the next part to see what his maid Erin plans upon seeing him so unhappy. Come along with me to see this servant who was praying for the young master to honor his legendary family lineage. Hearing those words only irritated Klein, so he yanked his hat off and threw it far away. Erin looked completely devastated, quietly mentioning the hat was handmade, which instantly made regret wash over Klein as he went to pick it up. Unfortunately, Erin then confessed it was actually knitted by none other than Priest Garrison. Klein froze on the spot, and right at that exact moment, Garrison Veerman appeared. The priest, cheerfully greeted the young master, boasting about how happy he was to see him wearing his hand-knitted gift. Klein smiled back, tore the hat to pieces, and coldly declared he would never wear such garbage again. Garrison screamed that Archman's spirit was rising, just as Dunkel, the imposing captain of the Red Chariot Knights, arrived. The captain calmly asked if today's purification ritual was finally over. He brought up the old rumor about Klein being Archman, noting the order spent 10 years investigating without finding anything unusual. Surprisingly, Garrison immediately agreed with Dunkel. The young master realized a painful truth. The priest ignored him, but submissively obeyed anyone with high status. "Now pay attention here before leaving." The captain stopped with a dead, serious expression. He quietly muttered that there is always a tiny shred of possibility hidden behind every impossible rumor. After taking those words in, Garrison prepared to leave, but not before reminding Klein about Friday's ritual. The boy's only response was to furiously yell at him to get out, before collapsing in frustration onto the sofa. He simply could not understand how someone who loved tormenting others so much was still part of the Holy Church. Achan handed him a towel and innocently asked if he was no longer Archman, which he immediately denied. He wanted absolutely nothing to do with that old identity anymore, even though deep down he knew the truth. Admitting it would only give Garrison more excuses to torture him, since he was constantly watched because of that rumor. Even after returning home, that sadistic priest kept stalking him relentlessly like a living nightmare. The maid defended the clergyman, claiming he must have his reasons, before her curiosity quickly shifted to another topic. She asked what an executor was and if they had high status, to which Dunkel clarified that title belonged to the order's strongest warriors. Very few would dare challenge them. Within the Rhineland family, only the dukes could rival them, which excited Akan and made her ask even more questions. "Wait, out of nowhere," Klein interrupted and demanded to know which duke was actually the strongest of all. The captain replied that while the 7th Duke was amazing, the first was unmatched, which Klein agreed with instantly. For the first time, his face grew dead serious, as he firmly reiterated that the 1st Duke surpassed all others. Dunkel fell silent while the girl smiled, noting that Klein always stared at the 1st Duke's portrait, but not with admiration. The captain quietly added that it had already been nearly 200 years since the family was first founded. Klein stared at the portraits hanging in the Grand Hall. 200 years. It was still hard to process that reality. The legendary necromancer Archman had truly reincarnated, gazing up at the paintings of the 7th to the 2nd Dukes. At the end hung Berkel Rhineland, the 1st Duke who defeated him. Now Archman was back as his greatest enemy's descendant. He remembered saying Berkel's name, and how the noble knight swore he only fought to protect the children's future. Suddenly, Klein woke up with a start in his bed, sitting up abruptly as he tried to catch his breath. It was only a dream, but those memories refused to fade. Archman once gave in to rage and almost destroyed the entire continent. Berkel Rhineland stopped that madness, and 2 centuries later, fate brought him back into this exact same heroic bloodline. He still could not fully get used to his new white hair, when suddenly he spotted a familiar silhouette outside his room. It was Garrison, who smiled and claimed he heard Klein talking while he was peacefully sleeping. With eyes full of suspicion, he asked if the young master was dreaming about his past as the feared necromancer. Klein denied it, claiming he was just tired, but unfortunately Akan suddenly hugged him from behind. The maid excitedly announced she heard everything, mimicking his sleep-talking about how he would wipe out the entire continent. Klein almost died of pure panic, but before the disaster could worsen, the head servant Veerman arrived. He announced that the swordsmanship exhibition would start soon, as a dark aura began to envelop Priest Garrison. And that is where we leave it, with the priest doubling poor Klein's torturous purification sessions. All right, let's jump right in as we watch Klein covering Achan's mouth to silence his screams from that insane punishment. As they walked down the halls, Butler Veerman mentioned the exhibition, noting the Duke himself had personally ordered Klein's attendance. The young heir was genuinely shocked. His father had never invited him before. When he asked why, the butler explained that relatives from the side branches were visiting, which instantly ruined his mood. Those annoying relatives had already arrived, and one of them mockingly called him the young Master Achmant. They were cousins from his father's side, with the northern branch stuffing their faces wildly in one corner. A bit further away was the western branch, where a blonde girl stood out because of her elegant posture. Another relative shouted, asking if he had gone deaf, but the white-haired boy completely ignored him. The insults never stopped claiming someone like him did not deserve to belong to the great Rhineland family. Klein admitted he barely remembered their names. To him, this family had already begun its downfall. Distant relatives judging the direct heir said it all. The sword exhibition kicked off as two warriors entered the arena. The purple-haired swordsman took a brutal direct blow right to the head. Instead of backing down, Dalton loudly demanded a real fight, but Dellen declared that it was already over. But pay close attention here as Dalton swings without hesitation while the blond boy calmly smiles, claiming family hope keeps them standing. This young man was Dellen Rhineland. He was Klein's half-brother and the greatest prodigy the family had seen in recent memory. Thanks to his massive talent, the lineage still maintained its reputation as a cradle of master swordsmen. The purple-haired warrior roared that things would be different before charging. Right then, Klein's eyes flashed with a violet glow. Dalton lunged forward, his wooden sword aimed with pure fury right at Dellen. The blonde heir moved effortlessly, shrouded in a golden aura, as he dodged the strike with unreal fluidity. Klein's eyes widened, tracking every step and movement, as a frustrated Dalton prepared to launch another strike. At that exact moment, Klein detected the flow of mana surging through the family technique. The very next second, Dellen kicked Dalton's wrist, ending the duel in an instant. After disarming his opponent, Dellen turned away, declaring he had warned him. The crowd erupted in wild cheer, immediately praising him. The meteor sword. I know you're thinking that was amazing, but Klein saw it as a warning to the side branches. Suddenly, someone called out his name, and it was none other than Dellen. His half-brother walked over, asking him how long he had been watching the duel. Dellen admitted he would have tried harder knowing his younger brother was watching. Klein stared in silence at the beloved gifted heir. He wondered why those relatives even came guessing they wanted financial support. Before he could think further, someone else appeared. Heinkel Rhineland, the 7th Duke, and their father. Dellen rushed forward to greet him. Klein stood firm, silently observing the leader of the family he had just reincarnated into. Heinkel proudly praised Dellen, knowing his son had worked incredibly hard to reach this high level. To him, Dellen represented the ultimate pride of the main house. Even Dunkel praised the young heir's outstanding skill. Dellen humbly replied he still had much to learn, so Heinkel repeated the first Duke's teachings on a knight's sacred duty. Dellen accepted those words with respect. Then the Duke looked at Klein. The white-haired boy tensed up as Heinkel slowly reached out his hand. His hand rested on Klein's head. The Duke muttered that he still felt no mana inside him, making the boy look down. Klein apologized, feeling deep down like a useless burden. Even so, Dunkel stepped forward to defend him. The captain reminded everyone that Klein had spent his entire childhood locked away in a freezing monastery. Still, whispers started spreading, comparing him to Dellen, and pointing out that the second heir possessed 0 mana. The relatives gossiped about the direct heirs being weak. Feeling deeply humiliated, Klein simply chose to walk away. The insults did not hurt him, but then he remembered Berkel Rhineland's words about protecting the future of the children. Clenching his fist with frustration, he wondered how the descendants of the hero who defeated him had fallen so low. As everyone prepared to leave, a relative stepped up to mock him yet again. It was Dalton. He taunted him, asking how a young lord could not use a sword. Talk about humiliating, but trust me, our journey is just beginning. You and I are starting with major drama, as Dalton calls Klein a disgrace, only for our main character to coldly remind him he is a branch member too. He brought up some sketchy rumors about girls making Dalton freeze on the spot. Guess his money couldn't bury those dirty secrets. With one incredibly simple move, Klein sent him crashing to the ground. Furious on the floor, Dalton spat out another insult, bringing up his mother's mystery. Right then, Klein stopped dead in his tracks. He turned around slowly, his face completely changed. The pure, terrifying pressure in his eyes made Dalton shake with fear. The issue was never his mother, but the disgusting arrogance of the branch families. His violet eyes flashed with sudden intense power. He wondered how the descendants of the legendary Berkel Rhineland had fallen so low. Before things got uglier, Dunkel stepped in. The captain sternly warned him that he wouldn't tolerate any more disrespect toward the direct family heir. Gritting his teeth because he couldn't oppose the captain, Dalton stormed off, but not before calling Klein a spoiled coward, hiding behind others. Dunkel placed his hand on his sword, ready to strike down any further trouble. Now watch closely here. Klein falls silent, clearly planning his next move as he asks Dunkel for an extra sword while night falls. In the dark of the forest, Dunkel handed over the weapon. Klein took it silently, recalling every single move made by Dellen. Was this really how the meteor sword was used? He wanted to test it himself, right under Dunkel's deeply worried gaze. To the captain, this made zero sense. Klein had no mana, and without it becoming a knight was physically impossible. Unleashing the meteor sword seemed like absolute madness, but Klein focused with Dellen's masterful footwork perfectly burned into his mind. The angle of the blade, the thrust, the flow of mana, every tiny detail remained crystal clear in his mind. His eyes glowed purple as he absorbed it all. Suddenly, Dunkel sensed a bizarre dark aura wrapping around Klein. The captain couldn't believe his eyes. It was physically impossible. Then Klein unleashed a swift slash. A purple energy blast exploded, obliterating a nearby boulder. With glowing eyes, Klein executed the divine technique with terrifying precision. Wrapped in that thick, heavy darkness, he looked incredibly powerful. Dunkel stood completely speechless. He could barely stammer out his young master's name. Klein smirked, realizing he might actually master this crazy power. I know what you are thinking. More training. Yes, and Acheon watches in shock with Garrison as Klein is submerged underwater once again. The priest cheered, thrilled that the young master could now stay submerged for over a full minute. Acheon was totally stunned. Garrison even joked about using a giant fish tank next time. Klein finally surfaced, gasping for air. He complained that the ritual dragged on, but Garrison just laughed, claiming he sensed some bad vibes. Acheon handed him a towel, and right on cue, Dunkel arrived holding an official letter. He explained it was sent by Dalton. Klein hesitated, but then remembered the relative Dillian had utterly crushed. It was an invitation to a hunting competition. Klein narrowed his eyes. This was way too obvious. They just wanted to lure him into a trap outside. Dunkel asked if he'd go, and Klein smirked he wasn't running away. He stared intensely at his sword while running Dillian's precise movements over and over again in his head. That's when he realized his ability's true broken potential, flawlessly copying any technique after seeing it just once. Dunkel stood silent in shock, and after a quick pause agreed to prepare the carriage for travel. Out of nowhere, Garrison announced that he would also join the long journey. Klein got annoyed and demanded to know what he was up to, but the priest replied with rare seriousness. He had sensed ominous dark presences since morning. Shortly after the carriage finally left the Rhineland territory, the carriage rattled violently along the bumpy forest trails. Inside, poor Acheon was looking absolutely miserable. She was completely carsick from all the shaking. Klein explained that deep forest trails are tough on first-timers. The rest of the trip passed by peacefully as Klein quietly observed the scenery outside. The thick green woods felt endless, bringing back memories from 200 years ago, when everything was buried in snow and corpses. That once brutal field of death was now overflowing with beautiful, vibrant life. He quietly credited this miracle to the legendary Berkel Rhineland. Finally, the carriage ground to a halt. Stepping down, Klein stared at the colossal property. The mansion was ridiculously lavish, shattering all his expectations. This was Cornwell land, and throwing around that much cash for a kids' tournament was downright absurd. Suddenly, an arrogant voice called out to him. Dalton appeared leading hunting hounds while asking what he was staring at. And the worst part is him bragging about building all this by stealing from the main family. Talk about shameless, don't you think? All right, come along and watch as a dog growls at our main character while arrogant Dalton smiles completely clueless. He waved his hand, ordering him to pay close attention as he unleashed the hounds. The hunt had officially begun. They had scattered raw meat across the entire mountain to lure their prey out. Dalton bragged that his hungry hounds had far better instincts than any human, following them bow in hand as they caught the scent. Han's arrow flew true, making the beast howl as more shots followed, scattering the wounded creatures. Dalton laughed, enjoying the show, while Han ran over to Klein, catching the hunter's eye. Realizing she was Klein's maid, he gave a sinister smile and grabbed her head, announcing she had a brand new job. As he grabbed her arm, another hand locked onto his wrist, Klein demanding he let her go right now. If not, he would snap it. Dalton backed off in a rage, throwing insults and absolute contempt at Klein. He then mounted his horse, daring Klein to follow, forcing the former necromancer to get onto his own steed. Before leaving, he ordered Dunkel to protect Han, handing him a magic signaling scroll for backup. Keep your eyes on this part. The commander recognized this manaless scroll. Klein warned him to use it if Garrison vanished. Dunkel had to activate it instantly. With his orders given, Klein rode off. From afar, Garrison watched silently as night fell, and Klein made his way deeper into the dark forest. Dalton could not be far off. Suddenly, Klein froze, spotting his rival surrounded by a pile of dead hounds. His relative greeted him with a mocking grin, saying he finally made it. Klein carefully got off his horse. This bloody scene made no sense. Dalton just smiled, calling this brutal slaughter the grand finale of their hunt. Drawing his sword, he revealed his true target was Klein, openly declaring his plan to murder him right there. He wanted to take his head as a war trophy. Klein just stared back with pure cold disappointment. To him, this was just pathetic. Suddenly, Dalton called out his hidden henchmen from the dark shadows. Multiple men stepped forward, confirming the ambush. One of them even dared to mock the main family. Klein did not even flinch. Dalton kept bragging about how the entire world would laugh tomorrow morning. They would gossip about the tragic second heir being eaten by wild hounds. Klein remembered Burkel's words. The promise to protect the future echoed in his mind. Klein suddenly burst into uncontrollable laughter, completely baffling Dalton. Dalton wondered if it was fear, but trust me, that laugh stopped dead in its tracks. Klein looked up, calling Dalton a foolish child for crossing the line, planting pure terror into his soul. With glowing crimson eyes, he declared, the Rhineland family rebuilt itself, and Dalton was now dragging it down. Blazing blue energy erupted all around him. A terrified Dalton shrieked that this was high-level magic, but Klein had 0 mana. Dark flickering flames enveloped him as the ancient necromancer revealed the truth. This was not magic. It was pure dark energy. The mercenaries backed away, and Dalton realized his grave mistake. Klein smiled. Ancient spirits sleeping deep within the earth answered his call, lifting his body into the air. Commanding the dead to rise, an entire army of skeletal warriors crawled from the earth awaiting his orders. The legendary necromancer was back. Dalton shrieked in sheer despair, refusing to believe it. Pale with absolute terror, Dalton shrieked the legendary name of Archimonde as he stared at the undead. Klein pointed forward, ordering his army to slaughter them without mercy, feeling his old instincts spark back to life. He thought he had forgotten this feeling after 200 long years of solitude since his last battle. Centuries spent in darkness, bone, and silence. Yet the voices of the dead still called out to him. The fallen warriors had patiently waited for his return. That deep connection was something only he could understand. In the middle of the forest, Dalton kept screaming the name of Archimonde in absolute frantic desperation. Klein smiled calmly, admitting that they used to call him by that name a long time ago. Everyone believed Archimonde was just a myth. A terrified mercenary screamed, asking what those skeleton monsters even were. A red-eyed skeleton answered him with an earth-shaking roar. The silence did not last long at all. The mercenaries mocked them as useless piles of old bones, a comment that actually offended Klein. Dalton arrogantly bragged about shattering hundreds of skeletons in his past. And that's where we leave it today, with this idiot asking for a souvenir skull before ordering his final charge. Look at this. The archers step forward, aiming their crossbows straight at Klein. The command is given, and a rain of arrows blankets the sky. Dalton already tastes victory, but his smile immediately freezes. Not a single arrow touches him. Shield-bearing skeletons form an impenetrable wall around their master. Klein smiles with satisfaction. 200 years have changed things so much that nobody recognizes his terrifying soldiers anymore. The enemies stand stunned by shields they have never seen. Klein calmly explains that only basic undead fight like that. His legion is on a whole different level. Dalton is left speechless as Klein raises his hand once more. The vanguard shatters their defenses. For a brief second, he remembers the legendary knight, Burkel Rhineland. Pay close attention here, because Klein will not let trash like this insult the great knight's legacy. He orders the attack. Charge. The skeleton warriors rush forward with terrifying speed. Dalton almost screams in absolute horror. Since when do the dead move like living soldiers? These monsters leap through the air with bone-chilling roars. Dalton barks at his men to stay calm, claiming these are just normal skeletons, but a mercenary is instantly ripped to shreds. Chaos erupts as the dead dominate the battlefield. Dalton desperately yells to hold the line, but Klein already has his next move ready. Undead archers appear from the treetops. The mercenaries look up in terror. Another volley of arrows rains down, piercing the runners before they can escape. Bodies fall one after another as screams echo through the darkness. Mid-chaos, a skeleton charges. Dalton roars in frustration that this is insane. These creatures are nothing like any undead he has ever seen. He commands them to drop the bows and engage in close combat, but nobody listens. Panic completely takes over. Suddenly, a skeleton grabs Dalton from behind and slashes at him. The monster's head flies off. Dalton laughs in relief. He knew it. Crush the head, and you win. But the headless body delivers a brutal kick. Dalton is sent flying, crashing to the ground in utter confusion. Klein smirks, reminding him, these are no ordinary ghouls. The undead picks up its own head and pops it back on. Tell me this isn't epic. Klein reveals how he conquered the continent, while the skeleton heals right before a terrified Dalton. The beast lets out a mighty roar, and Klein explains that souls filled with dark energy never go down easily. One mercenary completely loses his mind. These living nightmares just keep advancing no matter what they throw at them. Klein silently evaluates the battlefield. 11 soldiers. That is his current limit, since his young child body still holds him back. He steps forward with a mocking grin, asking if they honestly want to keep fighting. Far away from the bloodshed, laughter echoes beside a lavish fountain under the peaceful sky of the mansion. Priest Garrison chats with Aaron, sharing stories of back when Klein lived in complete isolation at the monastery. The little maid listens in fascination, imagining ridiculous scenes, while the scarred priest calmly watches her reactions. Garrison notices her deep affection for Klein, and Artem enthusiastically confirms it right away with excitement. Her cheeks stuffed with snacks, she lists off with immense pride just how wonderful her young master truly is. Deep in the woods, Klein coldly tells his enemies to stop screaming in the middle of a slaughter. The skeletons butcher without mercy. She happily recalls how Klein always shares cookies with her, while enemy corpses pile up in the forest. To the little girl, her master is the most noble person alive. But out in the forest, his gaze is absolute ice. Blood stains the battlefield as another victim falls to cursed blades. Dalton watches in pure horror as his men are slaughtered one by one. He desperately fights back, but freezes upon seeing a mutilated skeleton fully regenerate. Dalton curses the monsters. If they won't stop healing, his only option is to kill the summoner. He charges forward, dodging corpses and broken swords. Screaming Klein's name, Dalton leaps with his blade, ready to decapitate the boy. Dalton roars that it all ends here, since the summon will die with its master. The blade falls, but Klein stands still, eyes glowing purple. He reads everything flawlessly, the angle, speed, and rhythm. Energy surges as Klein firmly grips his weapon. In that moment, he envisions Delin Rhineland. The image of his half-brother appears in his mind, and Klein mimics his movements perfectly. Dalton is horrified to recognize the signature Rhineland technique, the meteor sword. The strike rips through the air with deadly precision. Dalton feels the devastating impact instantly. Tell me, how can someone without mana be this strong? I'll leave you with that question, while Klein glares him down. All right, you and I are about to watch Klein warn Dalton that his true punishment in this forest is only beginning. Staring down at his fallen cousin, Klein noted that summons lose power when their master dies. Even the legendary Archon fell to that exact weakness long ago. Blue energy gathered in his palm as he thought about destiny. How incredibly ironic it all was. The blood of his worst enemy had actually protected him. The power of Burkle Rhineland's descendants made him even stronger after his reincarnation. Klein finally accepted it. Since he now belonged to this family, he could no longer ignore the dark corruption rotting within them. Dalton could not comprehend a single word. In the next instant, absolute darkness swallowed him whole, and his body collapsed. Klein stared down in silence, whispering for Burkle to wait. He swore to rebuild this broken house with his own 2 hands. Suddenly, Dalton opened his eyes in a pitch-black void. Heavy iron chains tightly bound his arms and legs. He was strapped to a bizarre torture chair. Terror gripped him as a mysterious shadow slowly stepped forward. That cold figure announced that the traitor had finally woken up. Stepping into the light, the master of this realm introduced it as the world of the fallen, created by the great Archon Mond. Dalton shook with terror, wondering if this was the afterlife. Klein began listing every single one of Dalton's cruelties, the animals he tortured for fun, and the abuse he hid behind his hunts. He remembered every smile Dalton made while doing it. Dalton screamed in despair, demanding silence and to be freed immediately. He tried to threaten him, but stopped recalling Klein's sword and that final strike. Looking at his body, there were no wounds. Klein calmly explained that he had already fallen, and only judgment remained. Dalton completely broke down, consumed by sheer terror. Klein ordered him to listen closely. Those approaching noises were his retribution. The abused beasts were now hungry. Dalton shrieked in pure agony. He finally understood that this nightmare abyss was built entirely from his own cruelty. In the real world, his defeated body lay motionless on the forest floor. Klein stood in silence as the wind howled around him. Sheathing his sword, he prepared to leave before others arrived. All around him, the skeleton soldiers faded into mist. Klein quietly thanked the fallen spirit that helped him. Alone once again, he gazed over the ruined battlefield. He fell silent. 200 years of darkness. What purpose awaited the necromancer after 2 centuries of absolute silence? Pay close attention here. A chilling voice suddenly echoes from the darkness. The stranger admitted he was shocked to see forbidden arts being used in such a secluded place as this. Klein spun around, instantly demanding to know who this intruder was, and if he had witnessed everything. The hooded figure calmly replied that explanations were useless, since Klein would not understand anyway. A green light glowed in his hand. One after another, multiple corpses began rising from the ground. Seeing that technique, Klein recognized it in an instant. It was resurrection magic used to control the dead. The truth hit him all at once. This guy was another necromancer. The stranger conceded that Dalton had failed, but those corpses would still serve his future plans perfectly. Meanwhile, back at the estate, Aeon was eagerly trying to convince Dunkel to listen to some funny stories about Klein. The commander barely reacted. His eyes were locked onto the magic signal scroll. Something was seriously wrong. 3 hours had already passed, and a terrible feeling grew inside him. Dunkel decided to move out, but several guards blocked his path. They insisted that leaving his post would cause major trouble, since the competition was not even over yet. Dunkel narrowed his eyes and noticed the Cornwall crest on their uniforms. These were Dalton's men. I know what you're thinking, this is a total trap. The commander warned them to back off with a terrifying tone. Then he turned to Aeon, explaining that the young master had been gone for far too long. He ordered him to return safely with Garrison. Suddenly another guard announced the priest had vanished. Everyone froze. Dunkel immediately recalled Garrison mentioning a sinister energy. That priest had already made the first move. Without wasting a single second, the commander mounted his horse and dashed into the woods, holding the scroll between his teeth. He was absolutely sure something terrible had happened. Deep in the forest, Klein stood alone, before a second army of the dead, quickly analyzing the situation. His previous battle had drained almost all his dark energy. Summoning again was impossible, and his enemy mocked him. According to his foe, the boy's body had already reached its absolute limit. Raising his hand, he ordered the army to strike. Klein merely clenched his fist. The enemy thought they could end him so easily, but a purple light flashed in his eyes. He quietly informed the rival necromancer that everything he planned had just gone wrong. Golden light erupted, blinding the field as the corpses charged. Trust me, you and I cannot miss what happens next. All right, you and I are about to watch this holy protector obliterate monsters with a single strike. His eyes flashed with golden light before he prayed, sending holy power to erase the undead army. The hooded necromancer screamed as the holy strike hit him directly, unable to comprehend this terrifying strength. Witnessing this, Klein immediately realized exactly who had arrived. The strongest force in the world. The warrior calmed Klein and introduced himself as Garrison Weiermann. The priest firmly declared that his only duty now was protecting the young master. Klein remembered the truth about them. Only 3 living weapons existed in the entire Holy Order. They carried out the Pope's absolute will, holding the exclusive right to wield the relics left by the saint. These treasures were known as holy armaments, giving each wielder enough power to destroy entire fortresses. The enemy necromancer froze in terror. Paralyzed with fear, he demanded to know the name of this monster. Introducing himself as the church's supreme executioner, he calmly announced that his enemy's end had finally come. Holy light erupted around him as he ordered the sinners to pray before charging straight into battle. The undead shattered with every single strike as the priest promised to cleanse all their sins. A massive shockwave swept across the battlefield, instantly vaporizing entire armies of the undead. Holding his glowing book, Garrison declared this was mercy to the terrified necromancer who couldn't believe his eyes. Now watch this. Carefully faced with absolute power that wiped out his army, the dark mage flees in panic. He cursed his terrible luck, crying that facing someone like Garrison Veerman was not a normal battle. It was a complete disaster. Suddenly, Garrison appeared behind him, grabbed his head, and asked where he was going. Garrison tightened his grip, unleashing instant agony that made the sorcerer scream while desperately trying to escape. He calmly explained that the prayer was not over yet, telling the sinner to be grateful for receiving it. The enemy screamed in agony once more as overwhelming holy power surrounded the priest. Garrison summoned divine light to finish his judgment, while Klein slowly walked down the hill after witnessing the battle. The forest had transformed into a devastated wasteland, filled with scattered debris and shattered corpses. His expression darkened, realizing these remains were far from normal. Right then, Garrison called out his name. The priest took a single step, and Klein froze, breaking into a cold sweat, because even after 2 lifetimes, this power felt monstrous. Suddenly, Garrison flashed a strange smile, explaining he rushed over the moment he sensed the dark energy. You and I both felt that tension when the priest revealed the energy did not belong to the defeated mage. One wrong move and this fanatical priest would execute him right there. Fortunately, a familiar voice broke the silence. Commander Dunkel arrived on horseback, shouting out to find the young master. Klein felt immense relief, but exhaustion hit him instantly, since his body had surpassed its limits from using necromancy. Dunkel panicked upon seeing Klein covered in dirt blood and the harsh marks of battle. The commander leaped off his moving horse, rushing toward the boy, just as he collapsed to his knees. Holding him tightly, he demanded answers, but Klein weakly begged him to stop shouting since his legs were useless. Trying to understand, Dunkel asked where Dalton was. Klein answered with absolute calmness, admitting he ended up defeating his own cousin. To justify himself, he revealed Dalton attacked first, trying to kill him without a single second of hesitation. An older noble slammed his hand on the table in rage, asking if they truly believed his son would commit murder. The Count insisted that Dalton was a true knight, accusing everyone of trying to ruin their family honor. A blonde noble stood up, suggesting they focus on the real culprit, presenting documents showing Klein never changed his statement during questioning. Even worse, the records proved that nearly 20 mercenaries had been dispatched on that exact same day. The Count instantly went pale, cursing his stupid subordinates in his mind for leaving so much loose evidence. Still, he tried to resist, arguing Klein had never touched a sword, making it impossible to defeat trained warriors. The nobles began whispering, since someone without mana defeating so many enemies sounded completely absurd. Seeing that his initial plan failed, the Count quickly decided to change his strategy. And that's where we leave it. What childhood rumors will the Count use against Klein now? He ranted about dark entities mocking the young master as some reborn monster. Let's dive in and see how this chaos unfolds. But before he could go on, respect for the main family was demanded. The furious Count lost it, accusing Klein of sending assassins. Silence took over the hall, and a voice echoed from above. Klein walked down the stairs, saying he had heard enough nonsense. He calmly explained that Dalton was the one who attacked first, making everything else pure self-defense. He then revealed a mysterious new enemy had appeared, one capable of raising the dead, forcing Garrison to join the fight. The panicked Count pointed right at him, but Klein just smirked. With a cold stare, he asked what would happen if those rumors were actually true. The old noble froze, terror writing itself all over his face. His eyes darkened as he declared he would rebuild the Rhineland family with his own hands, and absolutely nobody would stand in his way. Right then, a knock echoed at the door, and a blonde woman walked in. Now watch closely. Her long golden hair drifted behind her, and her sheer presence was enough to completely quiet the entire room. Klein knew her instantly from the swordsmanship showcase. Some nobles questioned her arrival, but Heinkel Rhineland calmly explained he had personally authorized her entrance. The Grand Duke further revealed that Dalton had actually worked alongside the knights right before his death. Because of that, she had every right to attend the meeting. She stepped forward, slow and steady. Her eyes scanned every corner before locking onto Klein. After a tense silence, she asked to speak with him in private. The crowd was deeply confused. Heinkel understood the situation and granted permission, only asking them not to take too long. At first, Klein found the whole thing annoying. But then, he changed his mind. This could benefit him. You might be thinking the same thing. Is this a setup or a test? After parting with Heinkel, Klein followed the mysterious commander. Walking beside her, he made a firm, final decision. He was done running from any challenge. As the doors closed, he vowed that one day, all these knights would stand with him. This woman was Leah Reinpol-Wevern, eldest daughter of the Paul Wevern house, one of 3 grand duchies alongside Rhineland. She is a spearmaster and commander of the Blue Spear Knights. During a massive monster subjugation campaign in the Western lands, she fought an entire horde, completely on her own. Orcs surrounded civilians as pure chaos spread. That feat made her a living legend. Back in the corridor, Leia looked over her shoulder, asking if Klein planned on trailing behind forever. He replied that he was already coming, but she warned him not to get overconfident, since they are not actual relatives. Klein recalled Heinkel's past words. Their connection existed solely through marriage. They did not share a single drop of blood in their veins. Then, Leia calmly admitted, she called him out of pure personal curiosity. Before Klein could even react, she moved in a flash. Suddenly he was pinned against the window, Leia completely blocking his escape. She quietly asked if she could touch him. Klein froze, wondering if this absurd situation was actually real. Trying to stay composed, he asked what she meant by that. Leia ignored him and grabbed his wrist. Her fingers carefully examined his hand, her gaze locked onto him the entire time. Soft skin. No marks, no calluses. Absolutely nothing matching the body of a trained swordsman. Klein grew highly anxious as he realized she was checking far beneath the surface. Her fingers moved once more. Tendons, muscles, joints. Leaning closer, she reached her conclusion. Klein had never once undergone formal sword training. She narrowed her eyes, wondering how he survived and defeated 20 armed men. The answer she found was incredibly simple. He used a completely different power. Klein pushed her away instantly, backing up and asking if she also planned to accuse him of being a dark entity. Leia did not react, because she was not looking for easy answers. She only wanted to test his genuine reactions. Realizing silence would only corner him, Klein decided to take a gamble. He asked what if he truly was that feared monster. Leia burst into laughter. Giving him an amused smile, she declared that someone of his size could never be the dreaded Dark Lord. Klein was left speechless. The legendary former Dark Lord of the continent had just been deeply humiliated and called short. He even asked if she had misspoken, but Leia calmly offered to repeat herself. Klein simply decided to give up. His physical wounds were already hurting enough. Leia walked out to the balcony, staring into the distant horizon. After a brief silence, she quietly declared that the real Archon would never tolerate such a pathetic insult. Back in the Grand Hall, guards announced the return of the young master and Commander Leia. Klein reclaimed his spot quietly, admitting a bitter truth. He spent 7 years hidden away as the forgotten second son. Now the Count stares with pure hatred, and trust me, things are about to get even worse. Follow me here, because Klein knew nobody would believe him. Just then, Heinkel Rhineland asked what happened outside during their talk. Klein answered without saying a single word. He stepped forward, drew his sword, and slammed it into the floor. The heavy impact echoed, freezing every single noble in the room. Even Heinkel was shocked, while the Count shrank back in terror. Klein called him out, promising to personally prove the truth. He ordered the old man to stop hiding behind cheap excuses so they could settle their scores once and for all. Then he threw down the gauntlet trial by combat. The entire hall immediately erupted into endless murmuring. The Count stared as if he had lost his mind, since this brutal northern tradition was only used as a last resort. No rules, no excuses, the victor holds absolute truth. Klein stepped forward, accusing the Count of framing him, despite Dalton's clear evidence. He reminded them of the insults aimed at his mother, and demanded answers because everyone's patience had finally reached its absolute limit. The nobles whispered in pure excitement. Now pay attention here. Heinkel stepped in to announce he would oversee this duel in person. All gathered evidence would be completely suspended until the duel ended. At first, the Count looked confused, but relief soon washed over him. Without incriminating evidence, the scales tipped back in his favor. The old noble smirked, remembering Klein had 0 mana. Proudly, he announced his strongest knight would represent him openly threatening the young lord. Klein just smirked back, telling the old man to shut his mouth because he would never be on the losing side. An insult like that completely enraged the old count. He accepted instantly scheduling the duel in 4 days. This was no longer just about revenge. It was a message. He would crush every single traitor and restore the Rhineland family glory with his own hands. Shortly after the trial ended, Dellen Rhineland stared at Klein in absolute disbelief, asking if he had actually lost his mind by accepting this. He warned him seriously that this duel could easily cost him his life. But Klein just sighed in annoyance, saying he had heard that warning too many times. Then he calmly explained Heinkel Rhineland had already approved it. As you can guess, this only made Dellen way more frustrated. The talented swordsman immediately offered to fight in his place as the representative of the main family. Klein rejected the offer without a single hesitation. He reminded Dellen they ruled the North, thanks to 2 people, the Grand Duke and the brilliant successor standing right before him. He explained there was no sense in risking the family's true genius in a fight like this. If Dellen fought and something went wrong, those traitors would have the perfect legal excuse to get rid of the future heir. Looking serious, he admitted he understood his brother's frustration, but he had to handle this fight himself. Sitting with crossed arms, he declared he would not take a single step back, forcing Dellen into silence. His thoughts traveled back many years, remembering that cradle where the newborn rested under a warm, soft light. Looking at that tiny hand, Dellen truly felt like he was looking at an angel for the very first time. The blonde warrior never cared they were only half-brothers, and he waited 7 long years for Klein to return. Suddenly, he grabbed him by the collar, deep emotion on his face, while Klein remained completely silent. Then he noticed it. The former Dark Lord felt bewildered, silently wondering why Dellen was suddenly crying out of nowhere. Before they could speak further, a Rhineland guard opened the courtroom door, calling out for the young lord. The soldier apologized for the sudden interruption and brought new news. Count Cornwell had already chosen his fighter. Dellen stepped forward quickly, demanding they reveal the opponent's name. The answer was direct Rondel. The guard's face darkened as he explained he was a former knight excommunicated long ago. His name was infamous due to countless brutal battles, earning him a terrifying reputation across the entire North. The scene then shifts to an abandoned tavern. A stuffed lion's head hung on the wall while they poured a dark red liquor. The guard continued his tale. Rondel lost his title due to his insane obsession with killing. The next scene shows us total destruction. Sitting in the middle of that chaos was a giant man. Rondel lifted an entire barrel in one wild gulp. He sadistically admitted it had been a long time since he heard the desperate screams of a suffering young boy. The next day, Dunkel delivered the custom-forged sword. Trust me, you and I are not ready for what comes next. Still, he warned him to be careful. If he clashed with a mana-infused sword, it would shatter instantly. You and I both know the moment of truth has arrived as Klein steps into the arena, ready to fight. From high above, Duke Heinkel watched from the royal box alongside the arrogant Count Cornwell. Cornwell smirked, admitting he never expected to see the Grand Duke in a place like this. Smiling, he asked if he really accepted this duel, guessing his imperial champion would be way too destructive for a son without a single drop of mana. He even suggested there was still time to send in Delane, his eldest son. Heinkel kept quiet. Meanwhile, Klein scanned the dusty arena, searching for his massive opponent. Suddenly, a massive shadow loomed right behind him. It was Randall, gripping his shoulder with insane force. The giant asked if he was truly the young Klein, mocking his childish, fragile appearance. Randall kept laughing at his thin arms, imagining the satisfying snap his neck would make. Now pay close attention. Klein slips away instantly, leaving the entire crowd staring in pure shock. Count Cornwell burst out laughing, saying the pathetic boy was already running before the fight even started. He doubted someone like that could overcome a wall like Randall, who was already celebrating his victory. But Klein's mind was somewhere else entirely. That massive hand reminded him of the priest from those painful purification rituals. For a fleeting second, that terrifying trauma from his past rushed right back. From another balcony, another silent figure watched the whole scene unfold. It was Leia. Her knight warned her that Lady Hellion would be furious if she found out, but she brushed it off, saying she was not her real mother anyway. In her head, she boldly thought that if Klein somehow won, she'd reward him with a sweet kiss. Either way, She kept her eyes glued to him because she needed to see something for herself. Back down in the fight, Klein plugged his nose because of a truly disgusting stench. He joked his neck was stiff and warned him not to touch him again. But the brute ignored the warning and grabbed him once more. Klein coldly demanded he take his filthy hands off him, calling him a straight-up bastard. He asked if the Empire discarded him because of his garbage attitude, instantly enraging the giant. A split second later, a devastating punch came crashing straight down toward Klein's head. He calmly unbuttoned his coat while the impact completely pulverized the stone floor beneath them. I know what you are thinking. But as the dust clears, only his empty coat remains. The crowd went silent at the impact and Klein's sudden disappearance until he popped up right behind the giant. He muttered that the big guy had an awful temper, knowing a head-on clash would be total suicide. A single direct strike from that beast would shatter his bones and send him flying. Even if he hated to admit it, this was a fight he had to take seriously. Nearby, some kids whispered together. One said the young master was great at dodging, but wondered how he could ever win this fight. Another added that one graze would snap his bones. Hearing them, Delane remembered their earlier warning. Klein had begged him not to fight in this trial, knowing it was just a legal trap to execute the Rhineland heir. Delane knew he was right. Their family's entire legacy rested on this duel, and he could not afford any reckless moves. Suddenly, Randall charged with pure rage. Swinging his sword in a strike Klein barely managed to evade. Instantly, Klein countered, aiming right for the giant's head, but Randall blocked the blade and shoved him back. He stabbed his sword into the dirt to stop his slide. Right then, Randall lunged with a massive blow to end it. Klein blocked the heavy collision. Randall sneered mockingly, asking him why he was not using his forbidden necromancy. He jeered, asking if he was not supposed to be the great archmage. Klein grit his teeth as a dark idea struck him. He considered using his dark magic to end this, but Randall sensed a strange, chilling danger and jumped back. The crowd did not get why he retreated, and the Colossus himself looked completely lost. He was absolutely certain he saw something, a sinister, dark shadow wrapping around Klein for just a brief second. Count Cornwell screamed insults at Randall while Heinkel watched calmly. Klein smiled, promising he would not use any necromancy. He proudly declared he was a Rhineland, knowing this arena demanded they prove their worth solely with the sword. And that is where we leave him. No dark magic, just him showing us his true swordmaster strength. Get ready, because you and I are about to watch this entire Colosseum go wild for young Klein. Randall couldn't accept this. He convinced himself that Fast Shadow was nothing but his own imagination. After all, he felt superior in strength, stamina, and experience. Suddenly, mana erupted completely, wrapping around his body. He kept telling himself Klein had zero mana. To him, real swordsmanship required pushing muscles and breath to their absolute limits. Unleashing every ounce of his power, Randall charged forward. His blade came crashing down with truly devastating mana. But Klein dodged. Relying on his sharp necromancer senses, he could easily read every move, technique, and flow of Randall's mana. Randall struck again and again, but Klein dodged every single blow with absolute precision. Pure frustration consumed the giant. With a wild roar, he slammed his massive sword directly into the ground. The arena cracked completely as dust filled the air, but when the smoke cleared, Klein was gone. It was like he predicted the attack trajectory beforehand. Out of nowhere, Klein appeared right behind his back. Calmly, he whispered that such a massive body left the back wide open. In a flash, his blade pierced Randall. The crowd fell completely silent. That move was identical to the one Delane used during her duel against Dalton. Randall roared in agony. Nothing made sense anymore. Klein had no mana, yet he still managed to wound him. Leia's guard asked her if she saw that attack. She remained completely silent. Her eyes were locked on Klein. It's time to keep her promise. Now pay attention here. Back at the mansion, Duke Heinkel admitted that normally he would have stepped in himself, but he knew he couldn't act based purely on personal emotions. If he interfered in the duel, the Rhineland family's reputation would sink even lower. The real issue was facing an Imperial Knight. Klein stood no chance in a direct head-on clash. Dunkel questioned why this duel had even been allowed in the first place. Heinkel explained that Klein had stepped forward to protect the precious honor of his late mother. Falsely branded a traitor and locked in a monastery, the boy endured everything completely alone. Heinkel guiltily admitted he failed to save him back then. So at the end of the day, he felt he no longer had the right to stop him. Dunkel tried to calm him, saying, "Young Master Klein never got into battles he couldn't win." Back in the present, Duke Heinkel watched the arena, shocked to see Klein using their family's secret technique. The Northern Sword family survived the freezing lands by reducing their mana consumption to the absolute minimum. Their style focused on endurance and efficiency, whereas the Imperial style relied entirely on absolute dominance. It crushed opponents by releasing mana all at once in an explosive burst. But their style was different. It focused on striking weak points with minimal energy. That was the true essence of their style. Klein kept explaining that this art achieved peak efficiency with barely a whisper of spiritual energy. Because of this, someone without a single drop of mana could still execute the family technique perfectly. He admitted he lacked destructive raw power, but had plenty to down a giant like Randall who gnashed his teeth in fury. Mana exploded through the giant's body as his muscles bulged. The crowd fell completely silent from the shock. Count Conwell smiled with malice, recognizing the technique instantly. It was the Rhineland family secret art, a mana burst specifically designed to paralyze the opponent's movements. Randall roared that victory would be his, throwing himself into the attack with everything he had left. Delane screamed out to her brother. Meanwhile, Klein raised his sword to defend himself. Right then, he remembered Dunkel's warning. The blade would shatter if it clashed with a mana-infused weapon. And just as you and I expected, the sword shattered. Randall smirked, believing victory was already in his hands. However, Klein had calculated everything. Brandishing the broken shard of his blade, he stepped in close and struck. Instantly, Randall's severed hand fell heavily onto the dirt below. Duke Heinkel ordered an immediate halt. The duel was over. People stared at the field in utter shock. Even for Dunkel, it was hard to believe what he had just witnessed. As Klein explained, this style used minimal mana, but mastering it typically took years of brutal training. Even so, the young master executed every single movement perfectly, from his footwork to his sword strikes. On top of that, he purposely let his blade break just to get closer. No matter how you looked at it, this was an undisputed victory. As Randall screamed over his severed arm, healers rushed in. And that is where we leave this epic clash. Let's dive right into this. Klein asks if they can restore that hand, but they assure him basic healing magic won't cut it. Instead, they will have to prepare an artificial arm for him. Klein thinks medical magic barely advanced after 200 years. Soon after, Duke Heinkel enters the arena, calling out his name. He asks in shock why he is not shaking after such a brutal fight. Klein panics inside. He is no longer the Archmage, so he decides he should at least pretend to be a little scared. Before he can reply, a furious Count Conwell interrupts. The man just cannot accept Randall's utterly humiliating defeat. He screams about spending a fortune hiring that knight, but Heinkel dryly reminds him of their binding deal. With the duel over, Conwell must confess his guilt and yield to the winner. But the Count completely refuses. Now pay close attention here. Right as Conwell protests, his body freezes up as if his throat was just sliced open. A cold voice speaks his full name, and the man drops straight to his knees. He is totally lost, swearing Klein just pierced his throat. Meanwhile, the young man stares down at him with freezing eyes. As the rightful winner, he orders the Count to confess all his sins, right before the Lord of the North himself. Then he leans down and whispers to beg for mercy, warning that the heavy weight of his sins will crush him forever. The exact moment those words hit him, Conwell feels the terrifying presence of death looming over him. Trapped, he completely breaks down and tearfully confesses he was wrong. He admits he and his son plotted to harm young Klein, confessing they also heavily insulted the Grand Duchess Claire. The crowd is left stunned. One of the strongest pillars of the Branch family has just completely crumbled to pieces. What Klein actually used right there is the voice of the dead, a soul-shaking technique unique to necromancers, unleashing total terror by summoning the dark energy of the deceased. After taking that whisper straight to the face, it is completely natural that Conwell lost his mind. Klein slowly raises his broken sword to the sky, demanding absolute silence, claiming his right as the victor of this trial by combat. He announces he is the son of Grand Duchess Claire Ledilles and second child of the strongest northern knight, Duke Heinkel Rhineland. Right in front of the crowd, he proudly claims his name. His name is Klein Rhineland. After this, we cut to a quiet cathedral as Garrison walks inside in absolute silence. I bet you and I both saw this coming. Garrison approaches an old man praying to the god of light, calling him Cardinal Murrock. Hearing his grim tone, the Cardinal asks what is wrong. Garrison reports that the target under their watch was just ambushed. The attackers turned out to be a necromancer and undead beasts. And yes, that target happens to be young Klein. Cardinal Murok does not even blink, calmly explaining there is no need to worry because everything is going according to plan. It turns out the necromancer was sent in secret league with the Empire. He says the fear sown by those dark mages will inevitably force people to seek salvation within the Holy Order. More believers mean more power. The old man asks Garrison if he truly understands the bigger picture here. Reviving faith and spreading the divine will at the cost of a few lives is a cheap price to pay. Suddenly, Garrison grabs him by the throat, coldly accusing him of trading his sacred faith for cheap politics and dirty alliances with heretics. The old man stumbles, desperately trying to demand an immediate explanation. Garrison squeezes and the Cardinal's head instantly explodes. Just then, another mysterious figure steps into the room. He calmly asks if he feels relieved now, mocking him for killing more clergymen than any ordinary necromancer ever has. The newcomer is Archbishop Palama L., who insists the church needs to know about the dark secrets Garrison is hiding. After a heavy silence, Garrison looks him in the eye and asks if this whole setup was his doing. Palama denies it, explaining he was only gathering crucial intel on the specific target they had been watching. Suddenly, Garrison attacks with pure rage, but Palama instantly vanishes and pops up right behind him. Holding up a crucifix, he explains that the dark magic of necromancers always leaves a trace behind. He says it belonged to the recently deceased sorcerer, and the relic still holds strong traces of his energy. The first trace points to the soul return art, a corpse-raising method the Empire is actively researching. But the second trace is different. It looks like pure necromancy, which actually manipulates souls instead of just bodies. Garrison asks what that means, and Palama drops a bomb. 2 necromancers were there. You and I did not see that coming. Get ready, because we are about to find out that the second son of the Rhineland family, Klein Rhineland, was actually a necromancer. Those shocking words shook Garrison to his core. For the first time, he found it hard to accept that Klein could be a necromancer, while the scene shifts to an old miner working deep underground. He was so focused on his work that he did not see the dark shadow creeping up right behind him. By the time he realized it was too late, and a monster attacked while back at the estate, the maid happily celebrated her success. She had finally finished making a doll designed to look just like her young master Klein. Holding it up proudly, she bragged that it looked exactly like him, while Klein quietly read a book nearby. A whole week had already passed since that intense duel where he defeated Randall and forced a confession from Conwell using a dead man's voice, boldly declaring his true power to every single branch of the family. Klein hoped they would finally recognize his worth, but reality proved to be very different. His 15-year-old body simply could not handle that much physical strain. Seeing her still messing around, Klein told her that if she was done, she should go to her room and rest. She pouted, complaining that the young master was always mean and kept to himself, but Klein replied he was just reading a book. She insisted that since it was probably a novel reading, definitely counted as playing too. But looks were deceiving because hidden beneath that cover were anatomy sketches, magic circuits, spell designs, and complex necromancy theories. These were his private research notes. For now, Klein could only summon 11 skeletons at most. And though his control was solid, that number was not enough for a real war. He needed to research more, but his biggest obstacle was Garrison. That priest seemed ready to wipe out any trace of necromancy, and he already highly suspected him. Klein had to reclaim his original strength before that relentless priest came looking for him again. Next, Duke Heinkel received reports about sightings of dangerous undead creatures lurking around the mines. Klein immediately volunteered, knowing full well that real combat was his absolute best way to practice. His father warned him that lives were already lost and asked if he would truly be okay. Klein assured him there would be no issues, relieved that his father finally respected him after the great duel. If the enemies were undead, they were likely the same monsters that had attacked the miner before. But things did not go as planned, because Heinkel ordered Dunkel to accompany him. Now watch closely here, because Klein cursed his terrible luck when he saw Dunkel admiring the night sky mid-mission. Klein handed him a meat skewer. Dunkel thanked him and awkwardly offered to help with the fire, but Klein immediately refused, reminding him that he burned the food last time. Just sitting still would help a lot more, and Klein understood that crystal clear. The elite knight commander was a disaster at cooking and hunting, leaving Dunkel to apologize in total embarrassment. Klein just told him to keep eating while he cooked, remembering how he spent 10 years running from elite knights in his past life. Dunkel stared at him in silence before speaking. "I know what you are thinking." And Dunkel also noticed that Klein was hiding his true talent and battle spirit. It made him doubt whether this boy was actually the legendary reincarnation of Archmond. Klein coldly warned him never to say that in front of the priest, and Dunkel immediately agreed. But then he called Archmond a monster for turning millions of Northerners into undead, instantly making the atmosphere tense. A strange pressure filled the air, and Klein, quiet and cold, ordered him never to speak of that topic again. Dunkel did not understand his reaction, but before he could ask, they both sensed something moving nearby. A nearby village was under attack with terrified people running from hordes of vicious undead monsters. Before a creature could strike, Dunkel leaped in, slicing it instantly, while calling out to his young master. Klein dashed through the battlefield, coldly taking down enemies, while ordering Dunkel to focus entirely on saving the villagers. Within seconds, they wiped out all the monsters, and the grateful villagers asked who their heroic saviors were. Dunkel proudly introduced Klein as the second young master, while Klein walked away to investigate the bodies. And that is how we discover that for Klein, these reanimated corpses were clearly the work of forbidden resurrection magic. Stick with me because they used the exact same attack technique from the forest. A villager explained that it all started 2 months ago when the Count banned mine entry. People vanished back then, and realizing these undead monsters were actually local villagers completely froze Klein. Suddenly a man grabbed him by the shoulders, demanding to know if he truly belongs to the Rhineland family. Dunkel stepped in and ordered him to calm down, but the poor man just burst into tears. He screamed that the villagers begged for help for 2 whole months without receiving a single answer. Only 2 people arrived, and pay attention here. The body Klein destroyed belonged to this villager's father. That old man did absolutely nothing except work endlessly in the deep mines. Weeping, he asked why they had to suffer and blamed the Rhinelands, making Klein's expression shift completely. Coldly, he told him to shut up and asked if this was truly his fault. The villager froze. Klein added that he didn't turn their loved ones into the undead, so their anger should face the actual culprit. I know what you're thinking, but Klein completely ignores Dunkel and suddenly releases his dark magic. The souls of the corpses slowly began to move, and Klein gently guided them upward. Instantly, the spirits ascended. Speaking an ancient tongue and listening closely, Klein finally understood everything. A villager recognized this phenomenon immediately. It was soul resonance, a 200-year-old technique to free the dead. And the boy saw his father. The old man smiled peacefully before fading into the sky, and then they both headed to the mine. After a heavy silence, Dunkel finally asked what the spirit said, and Klein paused for a moment. He explained they thanked him for helping them rest in peace, but also begged him to seek vengeance. Dunkel did not look convinced. He remembered suspecting Klein was the Archon REBORN and the order never to speak of it again, so he drew his sword. He holds the blade right to Klein's throat, and trust me, we all want to know his real identity.